Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In his short work, The Stoic Paradoxes, where Cicero is presenting some of the key ideas of Stoic ethics that many people find quite difficult to grasp or to accept, Cicero makes a very important distinction that runs throughout the entire work between what is genuinely good and what people might call good but isn't really good. It's not necessarily bad by not being good, but it just doesn't have moral value the way that people often think that it does. Here he is following the Stoics, but this is also his own view on things. And he says that we can find illustrations of this in the lives of famous Romans. We might think of other people in our own culture who similarly exhibit these sort of forms of goodness in concrete ways. So let's start out by talking about what he says is genuinely good. And notice that there's going to be sort of a restriction. Many of the things that we talk about as good, or indeed other philosophers have talked about as good, are not going to be considered good in this way. So he says, what is genuinely good? And this is a little bit of summary here. It has three different qualities to it, or can be described in three ways. And these intersect and overlap with each other to some degree. What is right? What is upright is another way of translating it. Rectum. What is honorable or noble? It's a little bit difficult to translate this honestum, the word that we get honest from. You might think of it as that which is intrinsically valuable or that which has its own goodness by its very nature. And then he brings up this other term, with virtue, cum virtute, which of course could include virtue itself as something that is good. And the Stoics thought that, what is fundamentally good has to do with the, you might say, interior of the person and the choices and the actions that they engage in. So I think it's fairly easy to wrap our heads around the cum virtute part, with virtue. The Stoics recognized four main virtues, very similar to what the Platonists had. That is prudence, justice, temperance, and courage. These are good states of character that have been established in a person that are displayed through behavior consistently, that are durable. They can be expected to go from situation to situation. And then the actions that come out of that, actions that are guided by prudence, that are expressive of virtue, that have their root in courage, and so on. When it comes to what is right and what is honorable or noble, I think it's very often useful to look at examples that Cicero will use. Some of these are examples of people showing the virtues, like courage. He talks about a lot of people in Roman history displaying courage in their battles, quite desperate battles of Rome with its enemies, but also thriftiness and moderation or temperance or justice. All of those sorts of things. And in given situations, the Stoics think that we can, in fact, determine what would be the right thing. We're not going to worry about what the exact way of figuring that out would be, and that there are some things that are elevated above others that we ought to prefer and sacrifice if need be, the honorable and noble. Now, what are not actually goods, according to the Stoics? This is where people are more likely to diverge from it. So money, for example. Money is not a good. It's not a bad thing. As a matter of fact, the Stoics would talk about this in a very technical way as a preferred indifferent. We're not going to worry about that at this point. But it is something that it's okay to have. Houses he talks about. And we might think of whatever domiciles, furnishings that you have for your houses. He talks about Corinthian vases as an example of the things that the Romans had brought back with them as spoils for war. Power, offices, positions, certain types of honor we might think of in this way. Not the honorable as such, but the kind of honor that people give, like celebrity, right? Having lots of likes on your videos or your page or your Twitter, feed or whatever. And then he talks later on about another thing that makes its claim on us, because some people say, yeah, those things that you can have or have taken away from you, that you can take away from somebody else, not really goods. But what really is good is pleasure. Pleasure is something that is more distinctively your own. And Cicero will say, no, that's not a good either. The Stoics thought that pleasure itself was not a good. In this, they were going against the grain, not only of the Epicureans, who were another major philosophical school at the time, and the common culture, but also the Aristotelians and some of the other schools of philosophy. Now, it gets very interesting when we look at the answers to the question, why? Why aren't these things goods as opposed to this? So Cicero tells us that what is good should not in some way turn out to be bad for the person. But we can think of all sorts of cases where money didn't actually make somebody's life or situation better, but made it worse. We talk about power revealing the bad character of the person who had it, and then displayed what their character was, but wasn't able to do that before they had power. We talk about, houses and furnishings. As soon as you get yourself, a fancy house, now you have to start paying taxes on it. People might rob you. All these sorts of things. So if you use these sorts of things as a criteria, then it turns against itself. By their own criteria, bad things often do happen to people that wind up with good, in the apparent sense, good things. Same thing with pleasure. Pleasure can actually make things worse in many respects. You can think of all sorts of examples of pleasures we indulge in, and then afterwards say, oh, I should not have done that. Now, here is where we get to another criterion that's very interesting. Cicero says goods should make a person good. This is an argument that goes all the way back to Plato. And it's reflected in our own time. He actually talks about, do we say that a person who's enjoying pleasure becomes a better person because of that? Or that a person who has money, by having the money, becomes better? Well, we do in our common culture. We act as if that's the case. Same thing with power, of course. But does it really make the person better? It doesn't have to make them worse to not make them better. And these things don't make a person good. This does, in fact, make a person a better person. Acquiring the virtues, recognizing some higher standard that you have to live up to, will indeed make you a better person. And when that good becomes your own, when you become virtuous, you thereby become a better person. Another key thing is that goods should make their possessors happy. And we can ask ourselves, do these other things actually make us happy? Leave pleasure aside for a moment, because there is an argument that could be made there. What about money, houses, furnishings, power, all of these sorts of things that Cicero says, hey, I know about this because I see my peers pursuing these things like crazy. When they have them, are they really happy? Or do they keep on desiring more and more and more of them? Do these satisfy? That's a key question. Cicero says, actually, no. What they do is they not only don't satisfy appetite or desire, they arouse yet more desire or lust, libido, and they also arouse fear, metu in Latin, metus, that you might lose those things that you have. So they don't actually make us happy. When it comes to pleasure, Cicero also introduces the consideration of what our rational human nature involves. He says, yes, people do think that pleasure is a good. It is indeed a good for animals, but it's not the distinctively human good that we should be pursuing. We have minds. We have some sort of intellect. We have a higher nature. And he talks about, this call of pleasure really being the voice of cattle, not of human beings. And so in a way that's similar to this question of whether we're going to be happy by possessing that thing that's presenting itself as a good, that is pleasure, or whether we'll be made happy rather by possessing the genuine good. The genuine good will realize our nature as human beings. So this is not simply like rule following. This means the full development of human capacities as a rational being. So there is the distinction between genuine goods and what we might call spurious or only apparent goods that are called so by the many.